The hall was dark, filled with the sound of heavy boots and iron chains. Rows of alien slaves stood in silence, their heads lowered, their eyes empty. Among them was a young alien girl, fragile yet striking, with silver skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. She never spoke, never cried, never resisted. The guards called her mute, but to the slaves, she was a shadow of mystery. No one knew her true name. Her lips had not formed a single word since the day she was captured. She moved when ordered, worked when beaten, and survived when others perished. It was as if silence had become her shield. Her chains were not just iron. They were the weight of fear and broken hope. One human soldier, different from the others, often found his eyes drawn to her. His name was Daniel, a young recruit who had never agreed with slavery. But in this galaxy, orders ruled stronger than hearts. Daniel watched her closely, wondering what she hid behind those silent eyes. The girl carried water jugs across the hall, her thin arms trembling. The guards laughed cruelly, mocking her weakness. Yet Daniel saw something they did not. Every step she took was steady, controlled. There was strength in her silence, though no one dared to see it. One evening, as the slaves were herded into the barracks, a storm of violence broke out. 2 guards struck a young alien boy until he collapsed. The girl rushed forward, her chains clattering, her eyes wide with fear. But she did not scream, she did not shout. She only knelt beside the boy, her trembling hands pressed against his wounds. Daniel stood frozen. Why did she care so much when the others had learned to look away? He wanted to ask her, but she never answered questions. She never spoke at all. Later that night, Daniel walked past her cell. The dim torchlight revealed her sitting alone, her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, but they glimmered with something he could not name. It was not weakness, not defeat. It was something hidden, something waiting. Daniel hesitated, then whispered through the bars, "You're beautiful." The words slipped out before he could stop himself. The alien girl's head lifted slowly. Her silver eyes locked onto his with sharp intensity. For the first time, she looked alive. For the first time, she was not a shadow, but a soul. The silence between them grew heavy. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. Had he crossed a line? Would she ignore him, as always? But she did not look away. Her eyes burned with a strange light, like stars hidden behind clouds. Her lips trembled, as if they wanted to form a word, but had forgotten how. Her breath caught, and her hands gripped the chains tightly. Daniel leaned closer, his voice softer. "I don't know your name, but you're not just a slave. You are more than this." The girl's eyes filled with emotion. Not anger, not fear, but something raw and fragile. Hope. A hope she had buried deep within her silence. No one had ever seen her as more than a tool, a possession. But this one human word, beautiful, had struck through the walls around her heart. She did not speak yet, but something had shifted inside her. The chain still bound her wrists and ankles. Yet Daniel could see it. Those chains no longer owned her spirit. In the shadows, the other slaves watched with silent curiosity. They saw the girl raise her head for the first time in years. They saw her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. A whisper moved through the crowd, though no one spoke aloud. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. That night, as the barracks grew silent, the girl did not sleep. She sat awake, her mind replaying that one word. Beautiful. It was strange, dangerous, and powerful. It was a word that made her remember who she once was. It was a word that made her wonder if she could ever be free. And as Daniel lay awake in his quarters, he knew he had seen something dangerous too. Not dangerous in the way the guards believed, but dangerous because it was powerful, unstoppable. For when silence breaks, it can shatter empires. He did not know it yet, but with one word, he had lit the spark of a storm that would change the galaxy. The next morning began like every other day. The metallic horns echoed through the slave barracks, and chains rattled as the aliens were forced out into the work yards. The guards barked orders, their voices sharp like whips. But something was different. Daniel noticed it first. The alien girl no longer walked with her head lowered. Her posture was still fragile, yet her steps carried a strange, quiet strength. She carried a heavy crate of rations, her thin arms trembling. A guard shoved her roughly, laughing, "Move faster, mute." The girl stumbled, but did not fall. She looked up, her silver eyes meeting Daniel's from across the yard. For the first time, he saw something alive in her gaze. It was not defiance, not yet, but it was no longer empty submission. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had not expected a simple word, beautiful, to matter, but the memory of last night lingered. He had seen her react, seen the chains loosen around her spirit. Now he wondered if he had awakened something he could not control. During the midday inspection, Daniel stood guard near the storage bay. The girl was ordered to clean the floor, scrubbing with cold water and bloodstained rags. Two other soldiers joked loudly, throwing scraps of food near her like she was an animal. Daniel's fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. Any open defense of her could brand him a traitor. He could only watch, waiting. Then it happened. The girl paused, her hand frozen on the rag. Her head turned slightly, her eyes focused, not on the food thrown at her, not on the laughter, but on Daniel. Something unspoken passed between them. She was not broken. She was listening. She was waiting. That night, Daniel returned to her cell again. He knew it was dangerous. If the guard discovered him speaking to a slave, he could be executed. Still, his feet carried him forward, his mind restless. She sat in the same corner as before, her chains glinting faintly in the torchlight. But now her eyes followed him, expectant. Daniel swallowed, unsure of his words. "I don't know why you are silent," he whispered, "but I know you understand me." The girl tilted her head slightly, her silver hair falling over her face. Her hands tightened around the chain at her wrist. Her lips moved faintly, but no sound escaped. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You are not just a slave. You are something more." The girl shivered, her breath quickening. Her eyes glowed faintly, as if light lived beneath her skin. For the first time, she raised her hand, slow and hesitant, and pressed it against the iron bars between them. Daniel's hand moved almost by instinct, meeting hers across the cold metal. Her fingers were trembling, but the touch was real. It was the first connection she had made since her capture. A sound echoed from the far end of the hall. Boots approaching. Daniel quickly pulled back, stepping into shadow as a guard passed by. The girl lowered her hand, but her eyes did not leave his. There was no emptiness now. There was fire, silent fire, waiting to burn. The days passed, and whispers spread among the slaves. They noticed the girl was changing. She moved differently. Her silence no longer felt like surrender, but like waiting for the right moment. Some slaves feared her. Others drew quiet strength from her presence. The guards, blind in their cruelty, did not notice. But Daniel saw everything. He began to wonder about her past. What kind of people had she come from? Why had she never spoken since capture? And why, of all words, had beautiful broken her silence inside? The answer came one night in fragments. Daniel returned again, his heart pounding with forbidden fear. This time, the girl did something she had never done before. She leaned closer to the bars and whispered, so faint he almost thought he imagined it. "Name." Daniel froze, his breath caught. It was not much, just one word, broken and weak. But it was the first word she had spoken since her enslavement. He knelt quickly, whispering back, "My name? Daniel." The girl's lips shaped the sound carefully. Daniel. The way she spoke, it was strange, almost musical. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. Daniel's heart raced. He had unlocked something powerful. Her voice. She touched her chest with her bound hand and whispered again, softer, "Liara." Daniel's eyes widened. It was her name, her real name. The silence that had once bound her was broken. A word of kindness had given her back her voice. And with it came something far more dangerous than chains could hold. Hope. But outside the barracks, shadows were watching. Not all guards were blind. Some had noticed the change, the glow in her eyes, the whispers among the slaves, and they were preparing to end it before it spread. Daniel did not know it yet, but by giving Liara her name back, he had lit a fire that would soon burn through every chain in the galaxy. Liara's name lingered in Daniel's mind like a secret flame. He repeated it softly when alone, testing its shape, feeling its weight. It was more than just a name. It was a truth hidden beneath years of silence. And he could see that saying it had changed her. Every day after, when she heard him whisper Liara, her eyes lit up like a spark catching dry wood. But the barracks grew colder, the chains heavier. The guards had begun watching more closely. They noticed her sharper movements, the faint glow in her eyes at night. They called her dangerous, even though she had not spoken again. Their fear was instinct, born from old stories about her people. Stories Daniel had never heard, but he felt in every uneasy glance. Liara moved through the work yards with steady control. Her silence now felt like patience instead of weakness. She carried water, hauled crates, scrubbed floors. But Daniel could see it. Every task was just her body moving. Her mind was elsewhere, awake, alive, waiting. One evening, Daniel slipped near her cell again. The hall was quiet, the torches burning low. She sat as before, but now she did not look at the ground. She was watching him before he even spoke. Liara, he whispered, and her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. He leaned closer, whispering, "Why do you not speak?" Her hand tightened on her chain, and her voice, faint but firm, replied, "Voice is power." The words came slowly, each syllable shaped with care. Daniel's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" She looked down, then back at him, her silver eyes glowing faintly. "My people, voice can break, bind, command, destroy." Her breath trembled as she spoke, as if even saying this truth carried risk. They feared us, so they took our voices. Daniel's heart pounded. He understood now. Her silence had not been weakness. It had been survival. The masters had enslaved her kind because their voices held power beyond weapons. And Liara, the mute slave, was not powerless at all. She was dangerous, more dangerous than any of them knew. A shout rang from outside. Heavy boots storming the corridor. Daniel stepped back quickly. 2 guards entered, one carrying a shock baton, the other a cruel grin. "We've been watching you, Mute." One sneered. "Something's changing in those eyes of yours." He slammed the bars, rattling her chains. Liara's body stiffened, her silence heavy like a storm about to break. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. He wanted to defend her, but to act now would expose them both. The guards left with laughter, but not without a warning glance at Daniel. He knew they suspected something, and he knew they would not let it go. That night, the barracks whispered with unease. Slaves muttered about the girl with glowing eyes, the girl who might not be broken. Some whispered in hope, others in fear. Liara sat awake, her heart racing with every breath. The word beautiful still echoed inside her. Her name still burned like fire, and now the choice pressed on her. Stay silent and survive, or speak and risk everything. The next day, chaos struck. A young alien boy collapsed under the weight of his work. The guards descended on him with cruel fury, beating him until his cries filled the air. The other slaves turned away, too afraid, too broken. But Liara stepped forward, her chains dragging behind her. Her eyes locked on the guards. Her lips parted, and a single word escaped, sharp and trembling. "Stop!" The sound carried through the yard like a wave. The guards froze mid-strike, their bodies stiff. The boy's sobs fell silent. Even the slaves stared wide-eyed. It was not just a word, it was a command. Her voice carried weight, energy, power. And in that moment, Daniel understood the truth completely. Liara's silence had been her cage, but her voice was her weapon, and now it had awakened. The guards shook themselves free of the paralysis, rage twisting their faces. They struck Liara down with the baton, chains clattering as she fell. But even as pain burned through her body, her eyes never closed. She had spoken. The silence was broken forever. Daniel rushed to her side, pretending to check her restraints. But his whisper reached her ear, urgent and fierce. "You cannot stop now." Her silver eyes met his, and for the first time, she spoke his name without fear. "Daniel." The yard was quiet long after the beating ended. The guards dragged the boy away, leaving blood on the ground. Liara lay on the floor, chains heavy on her bruised arms, her breathing shallow. But she was not broken. She had spoken, and the silence of years had ended. Daniel helped her stand, careful to keep his actions hidden from the other soldiers. Her silver eyes locked on his, and she whispered again, trembling, "I spoke." Daniel nodded quickly, his voice low. "Yes, Liara, you did, and they felt it." His words carried urgency, but also pride. He had seen the guards freeze at her command. It had not been chance, it had been power. From that day, the bond between them grew stronger. In the barracks, when the torches burned low, Liara would whisper more words. Short, careful, fragile sounds. Daniel would answer softly, teaching her new ones. She repeated his name often, as if the sound itself gave her strength. And sometimes, when no one was near, she almost smiled. The other slaves noticed. They saw how Daniel stood near her in the yard, how his eyes searched for her when trouble rose. Whispers spread. Some said he was a fool, risking his life for a slave. Others said he was brave, perhaps even chosen. And slowly, quietly, a strange thing happened. When Liara lifted her head, others began to lift theirs too. But the guards were not blind. They felt the shift, the tension that grew each day. The cruel captain, Vorek, summoned Daniel one evening. "You," he growled, his eyes sharp as knives. "You've been too soft on the slaves." Daniel stood stiff, hiding his fear. "I follow orders, Captain." Vorek leaned close, sneering. "Then prove it when the time comes." The warning was clear. Suspicion had taken root, and it would not fade easily. That night, Daniel returned to Liara's cell with heavier steps. She sat waiting, her chains coiled around her wrists like serpents. He whispered quickly, "They're watching us. You must be careful." Liara tilted her head, her voice soft. "Danger, gros." "Yes," Daniel said, "but so does hope." She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the bars. "Daniel, why?" she asked. Her voice shook with confusion. "Why you speak kind when others cruel?" Daniel hesitated, then answered the truth. "Because when I look at you, I don't see a slave. I see someone who deserves freedom." Her breath caught, her eyes wide with a strange emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like this. In her world, kindness had been crushed, hope strangled, voices silenced. Yet this human soldier, bound by the same system that enslaved her, had chosen to see her differently. In that moment, the bond between them deepened. Not master and servant, not soldier and slave, but two souls, chained by fate, yet reaching for each other in the dark. Days turned into weeks, and with each secret meeting, Liara grew stronger. Her voice, though still quiet, carried more weight. Sometimes she whispered a single word, "Stop, enough, rise," and Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest. It was more than sound. It was power, raw and ancient. He began to realize why her people had been feared, why the masters had silenced them. But power draws danger. One evening, as Liara whispered his name, a shadow moved in the corridor. Daniel turned sharply, his hand on his weapon. A guard stood there, watching. His eyes narrowed, a smirk curling on his lips. So, the mute has a tongue after all. Daniel's blood ran cold. The guard stepped closer. "This changes everything," he hissed. "The captain will want to know." Before he could shout, Liara rose to her feet, her chains clattering. Her silver eyes burned with fire, and her voice, low but firm, cut through the air. "Sleep." The guard's eyes rolled back, his body crumpled to the ground, silent. Daniel stared in shock. He had seen her command a pause before, but this was complete control. Liara trembled, her breath uneven. Her voice had done this. Her voice had turned a man into nothing but silence. Daniel knelt quickly, gripping her arms. "You must hide this," he whispered fiercely. "If they know your power, they will kill you." Liara's voice shook, but her words were steady. "No, they will kill us all." Her eyes lifted to the shadows of the barracks, where dozens of slaves watched with wide, glowing eyes. The bond between her and Daniel was no longer a secret. It had become a spark ready to set fire to the chains of many. The guard lay unconscious on the cold floor, his chest rising and falling slowly. Daniel's hands trembled as he dragged the body into the shadows. His heart raced, knowing that if anyone found out, both he and Liara would be executed. Liara stood still, her chains swaying softly, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She whispered only one word, her voice cracked but steady. "Danger." Daniel nodded quickly. "Yes, but also proof," he whispered. "You stop him with your voice, Liara. You have something no one else here has." Liara shook her head, fear flickering in her eyes. "Power is curse." Her voice trembled. "My people silenced because voice brings war." Before Daniel could answer, the horn of midnight inspection sounded. The slaves shuffled back into lines, heads down, chains rattling like broken music. Captain Vorek entered with his soldiers, eyes sharp as knives. He looked at every face, searching. His gaze lingered on Liara for a long moment. Then, with a cold smile, he turned away. Daniel knew. The captain suspected something, and suspicion was enough to kill. The next day, the yard became a nightmare. The guards, restless and cruel, searched for excuses to punish. They beat the weak, starved the children, mocked the dying. The slaves bored in silence, their eyes hollow. But Daniel noticed Liara. She was watching. Her chest rose with uneven breaths, her chains shaking softly. Something inside her was breaking free. It happened when one of the guards dragged a young alien girl by the hair. The child cried, her voice sharp with terror. The other slaves turned away, too afraid to interfere. But Liara stepped forward, her chains dragging, her silver eyes burning bright. "Stop," she commanded, her voice ringing louder than before. The guard froze, his grip loosening, his body stiff. The child slipped free, stumbling back into the crowd. Every slave in the yard stared in shock. Her voice had not only stopped the guard, it had reached all of them. For the first time in years, they had seen chains tremble. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Captain Vorek's laugh cut through the air like a blade. Well, he sneered. The mute has found her tongue. He stepped forward, eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Show me again, slave. Command me." Liara's breath quickened, fear crawling up her throat. Daniel's heart pounded. If she obeyed, if she revealed her true power here, it would doom her. But if she stayed silent, the captain would crush her. Vorek raised his baton, swinging it toward her face. Liara's chains clattered as she lifted her head, her voice bursting forth with raw force. Enough! The ground itself seemed to tremble. The baton shattered mid-swing, fragments scattering across the dirt. The captain staggered back, clutching his chest, his breath stolen. The slaves gasped, their eyes wide with awe and terror. Even the guards froze, their weapons shaking in their hands. Liara stood tall, her voice still ringing in the air. Her silence was gone forever. In its place was a sound that carried power enough to bend will and break stone. Daniel rushed forward, trying to shield her with his body. "Don't touch her," he shouted at the guards. But no one moved, not the slaves, not the soldiers, not even Vorek. For in that moment, all of them had felt it. Her voice was not just sound, it was command. It was freedom waiting to erupt. Liara's chest heaved, her eyes glowing like twin stars. She whispered Daniel's name, soft yet filled with power. Daniel. And though it was no order, he felt the weight of it, the truth of it. Her voice was not only destruction, it was connection. It bound him to her, and through him, it bound others. The silence broke with chaos. Guards rushed forward, shouting, "Seize her! Kill her if you must!" But the slaves did not move. They had seen her power, and something deep inside them stirred. Some dropped their tools. Others lifted their chains as weapons. For the first time, the slaves stood taller than their masters. Liara's voice had awakened them. Her single cry of enough had broken more than a baton. It had cracked the silence of an entire people. As the soldiers closed in, Daniel grabbed her hand, whispering urgently, "You cannot stop now. Your voice can free them." Liara looked at him, her fear clashing with the fire inside her. And in her eyes, Daniel saw the beginning of a storm. The yard erupted in chaos. Guards shouted, slaves whispered, and Captain Vorek staggered back with rage in his eyes. Liara stood tall despite her chains, her breath uneven, her voice still echoing in the hearts of everyone who heard it. She had spoken, and the world would never be the same. Daniel pulled her back toward the crowd, shielding her with his body. "Stay behind me," he hissed, but Liara's silver eyes burned with fire. "No," she whispered, her voice soft but unshaken. "They must see." And they had seen. Every slave in the yard had felt her power. The young, the broken, the hopeless, they all stared at her, as if she were no longer one of them, but something greater. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. She spoke. She stopped them. She is one of the voice-born. The guards tightened their grip on weapons, fear twisting their faces. But fear is a dangerous thing. It breeds cruelty. Vorek roared, raising his baton. "Take her. Break her voice before it spreads." The soldiers rushed forward, but something unexpected happened. The slaves did not cower. They did not scatter. Instead, they stepped forward, standing between Liara and the guards. Their chains rattled like defiance, their eyes no longer hollow. For the first time, they had hope. Liara raised her head, her lips parting. Her voice flowed again, quiet yet heavy. "Stand." The words struck through the slaves like lightning. They rose taller, their backs straighter. Even the weakest among them felt a strength they had long forgotten. The guards faltered, their charge slowing. It was as if her voice had filled the slaves with courage. Daniel stared in awe, his heart pounding. He had known she was powerful, but he had not imagined this. Her words could awaken others, ignite them like flames in dry grass. Vorek, furious and afraid, barked an order. "Shut her up or kill every last one of them." The yard turned into a battlefield. Guards swung batons and raised blasters, but slaves fought back with chains, stones, and fists. It was clumsy, chaotic, but fueled by something stronger than weapons, hope. Daniel fought beside them, his training sharp and his loyalty now clear. He struck down a soldier who tried to grab Liara, his eyes burning with resolve. Liara herself moved through the storm like a shadow of light. Her chains dragged, but her voice cut through the noise. "Rise," she commanded, and more slaves joined the fight. "Break," she cried, and iron links shattered in trembling hands. Every word she spoke carried weight, bending the world around her. The rebellion spread beyond the yard. Slaves from other cells heard the noise, saw the fighting, and joined. The fortress that had stood unchallenged for years shook with the cries of the oppressed. Liara's voice carried far, carried everywhere. And with each word, the storm grew stronger. But storms always draw thunder. Reinforcements poured in, soldiers armored and armed with shock rifles. They fired into the crowd, and screams filled the air. Liara staggered, pain flashing in her eyes as she saw the dead fall. Her voice trembled, grief choking her throat. Daniel caught her before she fell, his voice urgent. "You can't stop now. They need you." Tears streaked her silver skin. "They die because of me," she whispered broken. Daniel gripped her shoulders fiercely. "No, they die because of chains, but you can end the chains." Liara looked around, her people fighting, bleeding, yet refusing to break. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, her voice rang out. A single word, sharp as a blade. Enough! The ground quaked. Air shuddered. Weapons cracked, metal bent, soldiers staggered. The fortress itself groaned under the weight of her voice. Every chain in the yard snapped loose, falling to the dirt. Slaves stood free for the first time, their wrists bleeding but unbound. The silence that followed was not fear, it was power. Liara stood tall, her chest heaving, her silver eyes glowing like stars. The slaves fell to their knees, not in worship, but in awe of what they had seen. She had broken their chains with nothing but her voice. She was no longer the mute slave. She was the beginning of freedom. But Daniel knew the danger was far from over. The Empire would not allow this. They would send armies, ships, machines to crush her. He looked at her, fear and pride battling in his chest. "You've started something that cannot be stopped," he whispered. Liara met his gaze, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, the storm has begun." The fortress burned under the weight of rebellion. Chains lay broken on the ground, weapons scattered, shouts echoing through the night. The slaves had risen, the guards had fallen, yet the battle was far from won. In the distance, sirens howled, warning of incoming reinforcements. The Empire was already moving to crush what had begun. Liara stood in the yard, her silver skin glowing faintly under the broken lights. Her breath was heavy, her body weak, but her voice was strong. Every slave looked to her now, their eyes filled with hope and fear. Daniel stood beside her, blood on his uniform, but his hand steady on his weapon. He knew the storm was not finished. It was only beginning. "Liara," he whispered, "they will come with soldiers, with ships, with machines we cannot fight." Liara lifted her head, her chains still dragging, but no longer binding. Her voice, soft yet powerful, answered, "Then we give them something they cannot fight." Before he could ask, the sky tore open with light. Dropships descended, armored and heavy, carrying dozens of soldiers. The ground shook as they landed, their weapons gleaming in the firelight. The slaves faltered, their courage trembling at the sight of so much power. Fear whispered through the crowd again, but Liara raised her hand, her silver eyes blazing. Her voice rang out, not soft, not weak, but sharp as thunder. "Do not fear." The words poured into their hearts. The trembling stopped, their backs straightened, their fists tightened on broken chains and stolen weapons. Even Daniel felt it, a surge of fire rushing through his veins. Her voice was not just command, it was belief. It made them more than what they were. The soldiers advanced, rifles raised, their commander shouting, "Kill the voiceborn! Kill the traitor human!" Blaster fire lit the yard, but Liara stepped forward, her voice rising. "Fall!" The first wave of soldiers staggered, their weapons clattering from numb hands. Some collapsed to their knees, unable to resist. The sound of her command struck them harder than bullets. Daniel stared in awe, firing only when needed. She was the weapon, she was the shield, but the commander was strong. He wore a helmet lined with dampeners, technology designed to resist the voiceborn. He pushed forward, blade raised, shouting, "You cannot command me, slave." He swung at her, and Daniel threw himself in the way, blocking the strike with his rifle. The clash sent him sprawling to the ground, pain burning in his chest. Liara cried out his name, her voice carrying raw power. "Daniel!" The sound alone threw the commander back, his armor cracking under the force. Daniel gasped for breath, looking up at her. "You must finish this," he whispered. "Not for me, for them." Liara turned, her chains glowing faintly now, almost alive. She raised her voice once more, her body trembling with the weight of it. Her words tore through the night, clear and unstoppable. "Be free." The ground split, the air quaked, and every last chain in the fortress shattered. The slaves screamed, not in fear, but in victory. Their voices rose with hers, a chorus of freedom that shook the very sky. The commander staggered to his knees, his helmet cracking, his will breaking. Even he could not resist the weight of her words. He fell silent, powerless. The soldiers, terrified, fled back to their dropships. The machines lifted off, abandoning the fortress to the storm they could not contain. Silence followed, but it was not the silence of chains. It was the silence after thunder, the stillness after a storm. Liara stood tall, her chest heaving, her silver eyes shining with tears. She looked at Daniel, who dragged himself to his feet, bloodied but alive. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. They had changed everything. Around them, the slaves knelt, not as servants, but as people acknowledging the one who had given them back their voices. Liara raised her head, her voice soft now, filled with promise. One word changed me. Now my voice will change the galaxy. Daniel smiled weakly, gripping his weapon, and I'll be by your side when it does. The night sky burned with light. Ships would return, empires would march, wars would come. But the storm had begun, and nothing in the galaxy could silence it again.